This is Moconomy Business Talks, the podcast where real conversations meet real business.
He is ruthless, he is tenacious, he is ingenious. He's a media tycoon who created a global empire worth more than $80 billion.
He has an extraordinary passion for the media business. He is in it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He eats, sleeps and drinks it.
Success does not come quickly or easily in the media.
News Corp's Rupert Murdoch is a modern-day press baron who rules newspapers and magazines, television networks and cable channels, film studios and satellite systems, often reflecting the message of their provocative and polarizing chairman.
His editors know what Rupert wants, and they're quite happy to carry that out.
For more than 50 years, Murdoch has been building his kingdom one piece at a time, along the way attracting a firestorm of controversy.
Rupert Murdoch is the embodiment of evil.
It's no longer the respected paper that it once was.
And sparking bitter rivalries.
It's a newspaper war. There's always someone who must die in order for you to live. And Rupert is good at that battle because he can take more pain than anybody else.
Those battles have taken his company from the heights of success to the brink of collapse and back.
Rupert is mainly interested in power. You could almost say a megalomania, to own as much as he can, to influence as much as he can, to be the biggest and best that ever was or ever will be.
Rupert Murdoch has been called many things, even on his own network.
I'm Rupert Murdoch, the billionaire tyrant, and this is my skybox.
If you're Rupert Murdoch, prove it.
Murdoch's presence in film, television, and print is felt in nearly every part of the globe.
Rupert Murdoch is what God meant when he created a media executive. He has all the attributes that a media executive is supposed to have. He has vision, he has guts, he'll take a risk, he'll go to the edge.
His empire started with a small newspaper in Australia and became one of the biggest media companies in the world. With over 150 newspapers, international television operations, and a movie studio, News Corp pulls in yearly revenues of some $32 billion. The man who controls so much of what we see in the media declined to be interviewed about his own life here. He has never been one to hide his political agenda.
I would say supported the Bush policy in the Middle East. We've been very critical of its execution.
Or disguise his ambition.
Extremely ruthless, knew what he wanted, and nothing would stop him from getting what he wanted. And I think that's probably been his hallmark the whole of his life.
The beginning and the core of his empire, the newspaper. Michael Wolff is the author of The Man Who Owns the News.
This is a man who grew up in the newspaper business, found success in the newspaper business, literally loves the newspaper business. I've seen him read a newspaper, and it's a physical act. It's as physical as literally making love to a woman.
That obsession was in his genes. Rupert Murdoch was born on March 11th, 1931, to prominent newspaperman Sir Keith Murdoch and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Murdoch. He grew up on the family farm outside Melbourne, Australia. He was sent to the exclusive Geelong boarding school near Melbourne.
I don't know whether I enjoyed it or not. I didn't think so at the time, but looking back on it, most of my memories are certainly happy ones.
But he felt out of place surrounded by the children of Melbourne's elite. Andrew Butcher is the former Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Communications for News Corp.
Rupert was definitely from a privileged background, but his father didn't own the business that he worked in. He managed it. Rupert always saw himself as an outsider. He thrived on that. It gave him a competitive edge.
He would set himself apart further when he went on to Oxford, where his attraction to communist philosophy earned him a nickname, Red Rupert.
That was probably the product of a young man's rebellious spirit. I'm sure that he would have rebelled against his parents where he could and against his parents' values, just like most young people.
Mungo McCallum was a young journalist in Australia who would later work with Murdoch.
I think a lot of what drove Rupert Murdoch, particularly in those days, was the desire to live up to his father's reputation.
It was a fraught relationship. I think his father was quite remote, hard to get a kind word out of, away a lot. But in hindsight, Rupert has an enormous amount of affection for his father, awe for what he attained, and determination to make his father proud.
In October of 1952, while at Oxford, Murdoch received the devastating news that his father had died at age 67 after having battled heart problems and cancer. Returning home, he found his mother under pressure from his father's colleagues to sell off their newspaper holdings.
Rupert was appalled at the way that his mother was treated and the lack of respect for his father after his death.
Part of the estate at risk of being sold was the Adelaide News, a struggling tabloid with a circulation of only 75,000. A few months after finishing at Oxford, Murdoch moved home to Australia to take control. His fingerprints were soon on every part of the operation.
He was extremely hands-on. I know from my experience of his editing skills that they were certainly the equal of anyone's.
In 1958, he made his first foray into a different medium, television, with Channel 9, a small local outlet. Peter Chernin is the former president and chief operating officer of News Corp.
I think one of the things that people don't remember is, Rupert owned a television network back in Australia as early as, I think, the late 50s, early 60s. So, and it's sort of one of the things that brought him here. He had been buying rerun rights and rights to movies from American studios and from American networks.
The station's value took off. Murdoch was soon buying up a variety of local newspapers, including the Daily Mirror, a popular lowbrow Sydney tabloid. But Murdoch's goal was to start a national newspaper. In 1964, he launched The Australian.
He was told from the beginning that it couldn't possibly work, that the distances were too vast, that there was not enough national advertising to sustain it. He was told that he wouldn't be able to get the staff for it because no good journalist would want to work on a paper which was so clearly doomed to failure.
The paper had a liberal stance right from the start, and the man in charge was ever present.
Rupert was running through the office up and down virtually every night, and it wasn't uncommon for Rupert to stride into the paper quite late at night, about 10 o'clock around deadline time, usually wearing a bright yellow raincoat and occasionally confused with a cleaner by one of the staff who didn't know him very well.
Murdoch's hands-on command of his papers established itself early.
I get very involved in the newspapers themselves. On the other hand, I think that I give my editors tremendous freedom.
At age 25, Murdoch married and had a daughter, Prudence. The marriage ended in divorce after 11 years. In 1967, he married his second wife, Anna Torv. Over the next 5 years, they had 3 children, Elizabeth, Lachlan, and James.
What's important to Murdoch is his family and his company. I actually think those things are absolutely connected in his mind.
As he matured, Murdoch grew more conservative in his views.
Rupert became more and more captive of the business community in Sydney. And when Rupert went to the Cruising Yacht Club, the other members were always taunting him about, how's that red rag of a paper of yours going now, Rupert? And this, I think, eventually got to him. Rupert, I think, is mainly interested in power. You could almost say a megalomania, to own as much as he can, to influence as much as he can, to be the biggest and best that ever was or ever will be.
By the late 1960s, Rupert Murdoch had landed on another continent and into one of the world's most competitive markets, and the very definition of old establishment, London's Fleet Street. He ran headlong into the notorious media tycoon Robert Maxwell. It became Murdoch's David against Maxwell's Goliath. Murdoch established a pattern of going to battle against his well-known competitors.
You can look at Rupert's business strategy as newspaper strategy. It's a newspaper war. There's always someone who must die in order for you to live.
With a 1-2 punch, he outmaneuvered Maxwell and purchased the popular and gossipy News of the World, and later the faltering daily, The Sun.
He remade it, revived it, built it in a very short time into a powerhouse. Readership was largely men, involved a kind of combination of sports, sex, scandal, a little bit of politics, and the page 3 girls, topless girls, and it worked.
Charlie Beckett is a media analyst at the London School of Economics.
I think the Sun newspaper, love it or loathe it, and millions of people love it and buy it, has had an extraordinary cultural impact, both for good, if you like, and for evil. And it's delivered it in a style that's engaged the public in some very real issues. And it's been, of course, a fantastic commercial success.
Now, Murdoch set his sights on a new world to conquer, America.
He was never comfortable in Australia and never comfortable in the UK, but he arrived here and almost immediately he thought, this is home.
That home became New York. In 1973, Rupert Murdoch and his family settled on New York's affluent Upper East Side. He was hungry to expand, but to break into the U.S. market, he had to settle for a small regional paper.
He buys a paper in San Antonio, Texas. He bought it because he could afford to buy it.
Next, Murdoch wanted a national presence, so he started a paper that would become The Star, hoping to compete with the lurid National Enquirer. The Star struggled to shine.
Tabloids are sold in supermarkets in America, which means that they have to be for women, not men. And it was never a wholly successful experiment for him.
Nevertheless, he later sold a recharged Star to the parent company of the National Enquirer for $400 million. But it was a fading liberal tabloid, the New York Post, that captured his imagination. In 1976, he handed over $30 million for the paper. A few weeks later, in the face of employee opposition, he added the New York Magazine Company for $7.5 million. The purchase included the liberal Village Voice.
It would be hard to think of a publication less likely to belong to Rupert Murdoch than the Village Voice.
The Voice returned a handsome profit. 8 years later, Murdoch sold it for $55 million. Murdoch was now on the map in New York. He was featured on the cover of Time magazine in January of 1977 as King Kong towering over the city, grasping its most influential publications, including his pet project, The Post. Martin Singerman is the former publisher of the New York Post.
The paper had been allowed to really dwindle and die, if you will. Now, Rupert Murdoch invested more in the publication, both in terms of money, substantially, in people. We invested in presses a year and a half later to bring color to the newspaper, added pages, and did the things that you would do in order to make a more substantial publication.
Murdoch's instincts revived the paper with attention-grabbing headlines. Inside, news of the day combined with juicy gossip, sports coverage, horoscopes, and games.
Oh, headlines sell papers, but for the long run, when you have a daily newspaper, there has to be substance, because people aren't going to buy once, look at it, and find nothing. So it really is a two-step process.
The Post became a New York favorite. Financially, it was a disaster, losing millions of dollars every year. Ron Grover is a business journalist.
I don't really think Rupert's in it to win. In terms of the bottom line. He likes the idea that it gives him a place at the table. He likes the idea that he can get his position out there. He likes the idea that it gets entree to politicians.
By 1980, Rupert Murdoch was a major player in the New York media scene. He continued to claim he gave his editors tremendous freedom, but that message didn't always make it to the staff.
Rupert wrote headlines, Rupert shaped stories, Rupert dictated the leads of stories. Rupert was everywhere.
Somebody said to him, Mr. Murdoch, there seems to be a contradiction. You said that you allow your editors to run the newspaper. And he said, there's no contradiction. I just know the editors I hire.
There's Rupert, and then there are the people under him. He likes to hire people who are grateful to him for having been hired. He likes to hire people whose loyalty he can count on. He does not like to hire people who might compete with him, might feel that they are on the same footing as him.
The way that he has influence and control through his news organisations is not really by screaming down the phone. There is more of a sense that his editors, they know what Rupert wants, and they're quite happy to carry that out.
What Rupert wanted soon began to play out in a decade-long spending spree. In 1981, he bought the prestigious Times and the Sunday Times of London. Back in the States, he scooped up the Boston Herald and the Chicago Sun-Times, and once again, he was met with a revolt.
4 top executives of the Sun-Times said they were resigning, including publisher James Ho. Syndicated columnist Mike Royko has taken a leave of absence.
I mean, I would never work for a newspaper if the kind was out in New York, if the kind was out in Boston, if the kind was out in San Antonio. They're trash.
And none of that fazed Murdoch. He wouldn't stop at newspapers.
In 1985, he does the deal to buy 20th Century Fox, a deal of quintessential importance because what it is a crossover. Here's a man who's in the publishing business and now he's buying a movie studio.
He paid former oil man Marvin Davis $250 million for a 50% stake in the studio.
He had a hard time getting the first 50% from Marvin Davis, but he was able to pick the other 50% up for the relative bargain of $325 million. So he took full ownership of the 20th Century Fox film studio, a multi-billion-dollar asset now, for about $500 million.
He once told me that the movies are the sizzle. You need the sizzle when you have the rest of the media empire. And so he knows he needs it because it's what brings creative people to the enterprise.
That sizzle could also singe, especially in the notoriously risky multi-million-dollar movie business.
One of the great things about Rupert, which is in a crisis, he is the coolest, calmest, and if he supports you and he believes in you, he'll back you all the way to the wall. You know, he's not a guy who sort of starts worrying about it or starts going, wringing his hands. If he believes in you and you're being straight with him and you convince him of the appropriateness of your decision, he's the best guy you could ever want in the foxhole with you.
Murdoch was anxious to expand his enterprise by buying into the United States television market, but he faced a serious obstacle.
There's an FCC rule that says you must be a United States citizen to own a TV station. And Rupert, who's ever the pragmatist, decided, well, if that's what it takes, I'm going to become a U.S. citizen.
On September 4th, 1985, Rupert Murdoch took the oath to become a naturalized American. Sir Rod Eddington is the former CEO of British Airways and a close friend.
When Rupert gave up his Australian citizenship to take American citizenship, there was some criticism of him for doing that. But the business is based in America, its major market is in America, and he's chosen to live in America. So it's not as if he embraced American citizenship only for the purposes of being a media baron in America. He's chosen to make his life in America.
And his ultimate mark. Murdoch had a master plan. He paid Metromedia's John Kluge up to $2 billion to buy television stations in 6 major markets. They formed the nucleus of what would become Fox Television Network.
There was ABC, NBC, CBS, and there was no room on the dial for another network. Well, suddenly Rupert comes along and he's able to launch a 4th network.
He could see that there was great scope for a network that attracted younger viewers and a more diverse range of viewers.
But the new network badly misfired with their high-profile debut.
This is the bleep button. We are going to be live, and that means no bleeps.
The Late Show starring Joan Rivers failed miserably against the unshakable Johnny Carson. For the young team at Fox, it was a big lesson. Garth Anseer is the former president of Fox Television.
No one had started a network since the 1950s. Understanding what would make a network differentiated from NBC, ABC, CBS, which were really the real competitors then, was something that we had to discover by trial and error. I mean, it seems obvious in retrospect that, oh yeah, if you run what CBS is running, you won't succeed.
Fox set about attracting top talent, like series creators James Brooks and Stephen Cannell.
It was a combination of some creative freedom, certainly more than the other networks were willing to give them, but we gave larger orders. We would go directly to series. And some of that was just because we had to. We had only a year to get the network up and running from scratch.
Beating the odds with a host of shows that countered the competition, the fourth network began to register in the ratings.
21 Jump Street, young cop show, Married with Children, irreverent family show. I mean, the working title of Married with Children was Not the Cosbys, and Living Color, and all those things became much more, I get it. That has to be different from what you can get on the other channels.
And nothing was more different than the show that would change everything.
The single biggest turning point was The Simpsons.
Ow! Quit it. Ow! Quit it.
Hey, what's with this?
Ow! Quit it.
Rupert always loved setting the network schedule more than anything. He was like a kid in a candy store. And I used to joke because he'd jump up and start putting squares up on the board and sort of say, how's that? And we go, well, that's really not that good. And you go, okay. And then he'd move it and put something else up. But Rupert jumped up at one point and took Simpsons and put it on Thursday night against The Cosby Show. He's talking about putting this tiny little show that we're just getting started up against the #1 show on television. And at first, honestly, we all thought he was crazy. We all said, well, you can't do that. We'll get killed. We'll get annihilated. And he kept saying, trust me, I think it'll work. That move of The Simpsons against Cosby was 100% Rupert's idea.
While Rupert Murdoch was expanding into American television, an ocean away in London, he triggered a revolt from the powerful British press unions.
This should be the print capital of the world. And all that work has gone out because of the activities of the London print unions.
In an effort to automate his newspaper production, Murdoch moved it from Fleet Street to a plant in the dockside area of London called Wapping. The efficient new plant needed fewer workers to make it run, 5,500 fewer workers. Murdoch planned to lay them all off. As the former General Secretary of the British Printing Union, SOGAT, Baroness Brenda Dean negotiated with Murdoch to try and save jobs.
He'd taken the view, understandably, he wasn't going to move out of Fleet Street with the old work practices into a new plant that didn't need the old work practices. What he wanted was an extremely radical deal on the employment practices in the company, and he wasn't going to get it. We were still prepared to negotiate. And he listened, and he said at the end of it, the music has changed, but the dance remains the same.
Unknown to Brenda Dean, Murdoch had already made a secret deal with the electricians union to run the plant and quickly moved forward with a trial print run.
And then, of course, once we knew that, and once we knew they were running trial runs, then for the first time as General Secretary, I said to our people, stop, take strike action tonight.
And he's no right to do what he does, and that's Gabriel coming down that road now. Those two lorries. They ought to be ashamed until their dying days what they're doing.
Murdoch received support from an old friend, Margaret Thatcher, who favored management over unions. He had backed the conservative Thatcher when she was a candidate for Prime Minister, and it was paying off.
Mrs. Thatcher's government passed legislation, and in the News International dispute, the Wapping dispute, as it became known, that, what was known as the anti-union legislation, became a key factor in ensuring that Rupert Murdoch achieved what he wanted to.
Thousands came out to support the protests, but the demonstrations would take a violent turn.
Wapping was called Fortress Wapping because it really was. There was security, essentially a Murdoch militia was called out, and he was demonized.
We did have some pretty awful stuff there. I mean, I saw some of my members beaten up by police. Violence did arrive on the scene, there's no doubt about that. And it was something that we tried to control, and sometimes we couldn't.
With the help of Thatcher, Murdoch crushed the unions, and his plant at Wapping was soon roaring ahead.
He took a big gamble on this occasion, and it took a long time getting there, and it was extremely destructive for the company and his reputation in the UK. But he got what he wanted in the end.
He was the boogeyman, the guy who broke labor's back. This turns out to be a seminal moment in not only the history of labor, but in the history of modernity itself. You know, he said, this is not reasonable, this is not logical. Progress dictates that we change the rules.
Undaunted, Murdoch's shopping spree continued. In 1988, he shelled out $3 billion to acquire the Annenberg magazine empire that included 17, the racing form, and TV Guide. Murdoch's shocking price was the highest ever paid for a publishing company. But that same year, he was tripped up by federal regulations prohibiting ownership of a newspaper and a television station in a single market. As a result, Murdoch was temporarily forced to sell his beloved New York Post. He was able to buy it back years later for $25 million after obtaining a special waiver.
He's kept the Post alive because he wants it alive. No one else in News Corporation wants the New York Post alive, save for Rupert and the people who work at the Post. It just makes no economic sense.
Undiminished, Murdoch reached for the sky, literally. His next big gamble was on satellite television. David Hill is the Senior Executive Vice President of 21st Century Fox.
For him to start Sky Television, up against a hugely funded establishment satellite platform called British Satellite Broadcasting, was one of the greatest gambles of all time. Nearly bankrupted the company. That heralded this explosion of television throughout Europe and the rest of the world.
In 1990, Sky merged with British Satellite Broadcasting to form B-Sky-B. Murdoch maintained 39% of the company, but the return on his investment was in a downward spiral. B-Sky-B was hemorrhaging money, and his spending spree had put Murdoch dangerously in debt with creditors. Fortunately, 145 banks decided to give him more time. However, one bank in Pittsburgh refused and threatened to call in a $10 million loan.
The way he had sort of set up this covenant of banks is that if one demanded the loan, then all of the loans came due.
It was a desperate 11th hour call from Murdoch to the bank in Pittsburgh that brought his company back from the brink of collapse.
That was this incredible accomplishment in which he managed to save the company. He had to sell off parts of it, had to sell the magazines, and had to commit himself to better business practices. The banks have told him he has to behave himself.
He had to restructure nearly $8 billion in debt. It was a near-death experience for his company and a defining moment for Murdoch.
He was deal a minute Rupert before this, and now it's much more structured.
Still, in 1993, he was back at the poker table. He forked over $1 billion for the Chinese television network Star TV. Porter Bibb is an American media analyst and publisher.
Rupert Murdoch first entered China through Star, the satellite television network that he built in Hong Kong. And he had, in the early 90s, broad and wide access to what was essentially a closed media market for the rest of Western broadcasters.
But on September 1st, 1993, he squandered it. Murdoch made a speech in London that inflamed the Chinese government.
Advances in the technology of telecommunications have proved an unambiguous threat to totalitarian regimes everywhere.
The Chinese retaliated by banning private ownership of satellite dishes, and with them, Murdoch's access to millions of Chinese homes. Star TV was under siege. Murdoch had to placate the Chinese government, so he removed from Star a frequent source of their anger, the BBC. He also killed an unflattering book about China written by the former governor of Hong Kong. Chinese leadership soon after expressed admiration for the gestures. And Murdoch would continue from then on to court Chinese officials to expand News Corp's often tense presence in China.
China is the new world. It is the future. And he sees this earlier and more dramatically than most people. But almost nothing works out in China. His competitor becomes the Chinese government, and he can't compete with the Chinese government.
Rupert Murdoch is not much of a sports fan. Even so, in December of 1993, he took aim at an American obsession, football. And he scored. With a breathtaking bid of over $1.5 billion, he snatched the rights to NFC games from CBS and stunned the wide world of sports.
I don't think we've ever done a deal where we haven't woken up the next morning with buyer's remorse. And I think in a way that's good because it spurs you to work even harder.
For the NFL, it could have been a major fumble.
I think the NFL was very brave. It was a gutsy call on their part because Fox had nothing. It didn't have a sports division. So in reality, and John Madden's great joke was, we shouldn't be calling ourselves Fox Sports, we're Fox Sport, singular. They took a huge risk. It was like, what were they going to do if we screwed it up? What would have happened if our pregame show was a shambles, that the set fell apart, and then when we start covering it, we're missing touchdowns, we haven't got this, the announcers are wrong.
And what if he couldn't reach all the Americans who loved football? Murdoch didn't blink. To get more eyeballs, he invested another $500 million in New World Communications, owned by the savvy investor Ronald Perelman. Perelman then switched the affiliation of 12 of his prime major market television stations to Fox. It was the biggest realignment of affiliates in U.S. broadcast history, and a bonanza for the local stations. The NFL on Fox generates over $900 million a year and has a weekly audience of up to 20 million viewers. Murdoch was on a roll, but the high roller wanted to get back to his roots.
He's found himself in the television business, which he doesn't like. I don't think the man has ever watched a full hour of primetime TV. But he likes, of course, the news business.
By the mid-1990s, Rupert Murdoch had his sights set on buying the only 24-hour cable news network, CNN. But its owner, Ted Turner, was contemptuous of Murdoch's politics and pretensions, and the feeling was mutual.
I don't even call Rupert Murdoch evil.
Turner eventually and reluctantly sold CNN, but not to Murdoch. In 1996, the cable news channel went to Time Warner as part of a $7.5 billion merger with Turner Broadcasting. Murdoch had to come up with another approach. He never flinched and created his own channel to go head-to-head with CNN.
Welcome to Washington. I'm Britt Hume.
Fox News quickly established itself as a bully pulpit for conservative views.
Part of the business plan is you shouldn't compete with CNN. You should go for an audience that is underserved, and you should do it in a way that's cheaper than having to send reporters around the world. So we just have opinionists, and that's what works and works incredibly well.
To run it, he hired Roger Ailes, a former consultant to conservative politicians and Republican presidents from Richard Nixon to George Bush.
Rupert, by his nature, is a little conservative, not as conservative perhaps as Roger Ailes is, but what he liked was the fact that Roger had a plan for Fox News. Fox News, in its early days, lost a lot of money. Rupert actually had to pay cable companies to take it.
It was lively, controversial, and drove liberals crazy.
Don't take your cheap little pathetic shot. I am telling you that that's what
you're taking cheap little pathetic shots.
Americans, and indeed our foreign allies, who actively work against our military once the war is underway, will be considered enemies of the state by me.
With a slogan of fair and balanced, former president and COO of News Corp, Peter Chernin, insists that Fox News makes a distinction between the news of the day and its talk shows.
There's news on Fox News, which I happen to believe is actually, very neutral and moderate and presented fairly. And then there's talk and opinion shows, which no one ever pretends are news or factual. And, Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity are clearly people on the right side of the spectrum, but they've always been presented as such.
The Fox News channel has soared past CNN to become the dominant and most profitable cable news network in the United States. But turmoil was brewing in Murdoch's personal life. He divorced his wife Anna after 32 years in 1999. It was one of the largest divorce settlements in history. And 68-year-old Murdoch immediately married 30-year-old Wendy Dung, a graduate of the Yale School of Management and former vice president of Star TV. Murdoch's personal life appeared recharged, but less than a year later, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer.
But he perseveres through this and, in fact, goes on to have one child and then another child. So at the age of 70, he has his daughter Grace, and then at 72 has his daughter Chloe.
In 2003, at age 72, Rupert Murdoch went after yet another glorious television prize, DirecTV.
He had wanted a satellite business in the United States for a decade. He dealt with the board of General Motors for close to 2 years to get a deal done. They eventually sold to Rupert grudgingly, and he finally won DirecTV.
His $6.6 billion offer gave him a 34% stake. But in a bizarre series of events only 1 year later, Murdoch had to give it up. While celebrating the returns of George Bush's election in 2004, Murdoch overlooked that a huge block of his company's News Corp stock shares came on the market in Australia. American media mogul John Malone, not surprisingly, was paying attention and snatched them up when they were transferred to the U.S. market.
Rupert woke up one morning and said, holy cow, this guy owns 16% of my company. He could be dangerous because he understands that John Malone is a really smart businessman.
Malone's stake in News Corp was now the second largest after Murdoch's. To get that chunk of his company back, Rupert had to part with something of substantial value.
To get rid of John Malone, in the end, he basically had to swap that stake for Direct Television. I think he might have wanted to hang on to Direct Television. It's become a really, really strong operator in television, and Rupert doesn't have a national distribution outlet. He probably would have liked that.
After reclaiming his stock, Murdoch moved on with the 2005 purchase of the social networking site MySpace. Once again, he moved swiftly and paid a huge price to beat out a rival, this time Viacom's Sumner Redstone.
Rupert's experience with the internet is a comic one, perhaps from his point of view, a tragic comic one. MySpace, which was, he bought for, I think somewhat more than $500 million. At one point, they thought it was worth $25 billion, and it's worth scrap now.
The effort was considered a disaster. Facebook left MySpace in the dust. Before long, Murdoch returned to his natural element, refocusing his eyes on one of the most prestigious and treasured newspapers in the world. Sarah Ellison is the author of War at the Wall Street Journal and was a former reporter for the paper.
When I talk to people about Murdoch and his lust for the Wall Street Journal, even his children said they couldn't remember a time when he wasn't talking about the newspaper.
The Wall Street Journal and its parent company, Dow Jones, were owned by the Bancrofts, a prominent Boston family who were largely hands-off owners.
He's tried to buy the Wall Street Journal 3 times before, and they just dismiss him, in an incredibly haughty, snobbish way.
When he first learned about the divisions within the Bancroft family that had owned the newspaper for over 100 years, that was sort of blood in the water.
Murdoch seized the moment and made an offer. The stock was trading for $36 a share. Murdoch offered a stunning $60 a share. Jim Ottaway is former vice president and director of Dow Jones.
I certainly remember my reaction, which was shock, feeling of great disappointment that my life in journalism would end with the company I worked hard for to make really great newspapers at the Wall Street Journal, to have them taken over by a man who I did not admire as a newspaper publisher.
The staggering offer split the Bancroft family even further.
At one point, there were children threatening to sue their parents if they agreed to sell to Murdoch. I thought he would damage the quality of the Wall Street Journal if he applied the journalistic principles that he had followed most of his life, which included attacking his enemies, supporting his friends, supporting politicians who could help him get business advantages.
Murdoch promised he would maintain the quality of the paper and keep the staff.
Are you going to give full independence to the Wall Street Journal?
I'm not saying any more than I've actually told you. I'd seen that time and again he had made promises to owners and then broken them very soon. He said he would maintain the standards of the Times of London and guaranteed he wouldn't change the editor, Harry Evans. And within about a year, he'd fired Evans.
Faced with few options and no offer that was as attractive as Murdoch's $6 billion, the Bancrofts gave in. On August 1st, 2007, Dow Jones entered into an agreement with News Corp that handed Murdoch the Wall Street Journal.
I'm privy to his incredible excitement over acquiring the journal, this enormous feeling of satisfaction, and this rethinking of his own life. He's going to really spend time at the journal.
Not everyone was as excited about that.
We're here today to tell everyone to make sure that they know that Rupert Murdoch has bought the Wall Street Journal.
Predictably, Murdoch soon broke the promises he'd made and brought in his own people.
And it was kind of through the back door that he managed to deflate the culture and puncture the egos of the people who were at the Wall Street Journal in one sort of fell swoop.
But Murdoch surprised many of his critics. Eventually, the Wall Street Journal surpassed USA Today to become the #1 daily paper in America. Rupert Murdoch, a lion in winter, turned 80 in 2011. After 60 years as the leader of a media empire, there were questions as to who would follow him.
I think he looks forward to the day when all three of his children that are interested in the business work for him together. I think he looks forward to the day when it's Rupert times 4.
Murdoch bought his daughter Elizabeth's TV production company, Shine, for nearly $700 million in 2011. Lachlan, after an ill-fated career at News Corp, returned to Australia to run the 10 television network. Murdoch's youngest son, James, was named News Corp's new Deputy Chief Operating Officer in New York.
I'm very competitive, and we're very competitive to the extent that where we need to take market share, we're going to go ahead and take it.
That Murdoch competitive spirit seeped into the company culture with devastating consequences. Media reports disclosed allegations that the Murdoch-owned tabloid News of the World tapped the voicemails of a teenage murder victim and her family and paid police for information.
I think initially this was seen as another sordid little journalism scandal of some journalists who had gone too far with private investigators. And what we thought was a relatively limited scandal turns out to have been a pervasive, systematic abuse of journalistic power.
The mobile phones of celebrities and politicians were also hacked.
So it turns out this phone hacking was a widespread and even ubiquitous, that it was being done to virtually everybody who had the possibility of offering any news or gossip.
To contain the scandal, the 168-year-old News of the World was shut down in July 2011. Murdoch apologized to a British parliamentary committee.
Just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
He blamed his staff for misleading him about the hacking.
People I trusted, I'm not saying who, I don't know what level, but let me down, and I think they behaved disgracefully and betrayed the company and me.
In the middle of the hearing, a protester tried to attack Murdoch with a pie. His wife, Wendy, physically defended him. The scandal has been damaging and costly. James, the heir apparent, stepped down as chairman of B-Sky-B. And News Corp has spent over $380 million in legal fees and settlements. 2 years after Wendy Murdoch defended her husband, Rupert Murdoch filed for divorce. Knocked down but not out, Murdoch launched Fox Sports Network to compete with ESPN. And to placate shareholders, in June 2013, Murdoch split his 6-decade-old publishing business from the rest of his media empire.
Well, the sky's the limit. The new company officially starts trading today. It's already the largest newspaper publisher in the United States with a market value of $8.8 billion.
Rupert Murdoch has built a vast and varied empire. an unrivaled and unstoppable concentration of power.
This is a man who is extraordinarily powerful in commercial terms and in political terms and in cultural terms.
He's on the level of Hearst, certainly. The defining characteristic of this thing that we call the press baron, it is that constant quest for more and more power, and that's what we'll remember Murdoch for, and for good and bad.